Good morning, everyone. Give me a second and we'll start. Okay, good morning, everyone. It's our 5th session in the Fundamentals and Practical Leadership for New and Emerging Leaders. This session is focused on conflict resolution, and my name is Maria Sanchez-Keen with the Center for Organizational Effectiveness. So just as a reminder, many of us, of course, are so familiar now with participating in virtual realities in terms of meetings. So remember that we have a question box and a comment box. Your audio right now is muted. You can raise your hand to let us know that you want to participate. We will be doing interactive polls like we have in the past. And you can, of course, always speak as well. So just as a reminder, in terms of where it is that you find the interactive polls, which we will go to in a moment, it is here under links under your handout. So you need to find your console, click the arrow if it's not in big form, and then press handouts, and the link to the polls will open it up, and you just click the link in there and it will take you to the polls. So what happens when we don't all get along? How to navigate personalities that provide a challenge to you in your work. So again, this workshop really will focus on becoming more self-aware of what happens to you during conflict, because as a leader, we need to have an understanding of what happens so that we can be mindful of how our experience of what's happening inside of us might impact how it is that we work through conflict with our colleagues. So we want to talk about that. We want to talk about what are some of the tools and skills and behaviors that we need to manage and watch for as we think about the team that we're working with. So in terms of the start, we are going to start by doing some self-awareness work. So what happens to you during conflict? We're also going to talk about knowledge. So having an understanding of all the different styles of leadership. So we're going to look at that as well.
Maria, I see. Hi, I see you started without me, but I was actually going to say, I think it might make sense for me to do the introduction for this one.
Okay, sorry, Carrie, but we've already started and you were a little bit late. So we're just going to continue if you don't mind. So anyway,
I found some new information just very, very recently, and I've edited the agenda a little bit. So if we can just switch over to my screen,
okay.
then I've got a new agenda on there. We can take it from there.
I'm sorry to everybody that's on right now, Carrie. I think that's something that we can discuss after, but we had already agreed to the agenda that we have. So I'm just going to continue.
Fine.
All right, so we're going to stop there because that was just a bit of a role play for all of you. So if you can go to your polls, there's links to polls, click on the polls everywhere, so that's in your handout. And what we want you to be thinking about is what happened to you as you heard Carrie and my interaction. So be honest, what happened inside of you? And it's really important for us to just be mindful of that, of our experience, even of that little bit of a situation that Carrie and I did. Just so you know, we actually get along very well, right, Carrie? That was just, just a moment for us. But yeah, uncomfortable, awkward. Wanted to withdraw, yeah. Eek, absolutely. So hopefully not too bad for you. Awkward, yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's all of these words are coming up. Just type in what you thought. That was so uncomfortable. I was relieved when I saw the smiles. Nervous. Yeah. So the reason we started with that, I was uncomfortable and feeling bad for Carrie. Hey, what about me? I was a bit stressed and felt awkward. Yeah. So the reason we wanted to start that way is because when we talk about conflict, it's one thing to talk about conflict. It's another thing for us to just kind of experience that for a moment and realize that, awesome, good for you. And we're going to talk about people who feel awesome in conflict, tense, yeah. And how part of addressing conflict is having an understanding of what happens inside of us. And the more we understand that, the better off we are, and then understanding how that actually impacts and influences and colors how we work through conflict. Felt badly for both of you with everyone listening. I assumed it was a role play. Yeah, good for you. Worried. Yeah. At first surprised, made me pay attention, then laughed. Uncomfortable. Yeah, and so, as we see the words coming up, stop paying attention, figured you needed to figure it out for yourself. Nervous. Yeah, uncomfortable. I'll tell you that what happens to me, fight, I was ready to drop out. Yes, oh, flight, absolutely, sorry, so uncomfortable. Yeah, thank you for not dropping out and sticking with it for a second. Even for me, so, and I'll have Carrie talk about it too, even for me, when, I thought it was obvious, actually, good for you, cringe, yeah. Even preparing for it, I know it's a role play. I know that I get along well with Carrie, and still my stomach turns and my hands get sweaty. So for me to just be aware of, okay, this is what happens to me sometimes during conflict. How about for you, Carrie?
Yeah, well, it was quite awkward for me, particularly to play the role that I was playing, because that's not something that I would normally do. And yeah, it sort of initiating the conflict itself for me was very stressful, very awkward, as you say, like sort of the sweaty palms, you always have a little bit of nervousness before you go into doing a presentation, but certainly much more than I would have normally had, sort of knowing everything. So even though we both knew going in, and we practiced it even exactly what it was, and that it wasn't a conflict, it still created more emotion than sort of the regular, little bit of anxiety around doing a presentation.
Yeah. So thank you for being okay with us inviting you into something so that you could touch what happens to you sometimes in conflict. So I'm going to ask you to go back to your handout and click on the polls, because we're going to do a few polls here just to gather our understandings and see our collective differences and similarities. So the next question is, and again, this is just self-awareness. So as I was growing up, my impression of conflict was. So, and if you're not sure how to get to your poll, just type a question, and Kathleen, who's also our teammate, will be able to answer it. Yeah, and so what's interesting about the way we're doing this one today is if you stay on this handout here, you'll see everybody's responses come out. And if it's something that you agree with, then you can like it. Good job, just like you're doing at night. So as I was growing up, my impression of conflict was fighting, fight, flight. It should be avoided. Disagreement, something to avoid. Yeah, yelling, stressful, not liking someone. Negative and something to avoid, bad. Confusing my family, avoided conflict. Yeah, avoided. Stressful, confusing. It's going to go down. Anxiety. So just stay on this page for now, because we're going to do a few of these. Created a huge stress, holding on to tension and energy. Silence, blow-ups. Personalities clashing, being angry, suppressed. Interesting how we see so many different experiences of conflict. If you avoid it, it will go away. Being angry. So imagine that all of what we are talking about here is what might be experienced in your teams as you deal with conflict. And understand that sometimes, particularly under stress, we will go back to that experience or how we feel or what our growing up experience of conflict was. So you might find that under stress, if you're experiencing a conflict in your team and you're the leader, you might just want to say, I want to avoid it. So becoming aware, and it starts with an understanding of what we grew up with. And it doesn't mean that we can't move out of that or learn from it. Certainly all of us have, but understand that it still pulls on us and has a hold on us. And the variety of things that we saw in terms of what happened to you during our little conflict, but also even this helps us to understand that the more aware that we become of what happens to us, the more that we can become aware and understand it and realize that we need to move past where we are to deal with conflict in a healthy way. And so, of course, we've done a lot already in the other sessions to kind of create a container of healthy conflict. Today, we want to talk about when it's not healthy and when it's starting to get out of that container, what might be the things that we do. So Some of the things that we're hearing here, negative and something to avoid, fighting, something to avoid, confusing by my family avoided conflict, felt bad, stressful. Avoidance so big in our group. So thank you. Here's the next question. Okay, so that's growing up. And the second one is, with clients or patients, I've been able to address conflict by. So we grow out of our growing up experience of conflict. And often when it's not personal, when I'm not involved in it or people I love, it becomes easier for us to address conflict. So what I find with organizations is that they're really good at addressing conflict with clients and patients. They can do it so well. But when it comes to internally within my team or with a few people, I kind of lose all of my skills to do that, and it becomes extremely personal and emotional and hard to do. And that's really common. So it's a matter of understanding that and then understanding, what do I do in order to work through that? So here we see things being clear, concise, and establishing boundaries. Amazing. Being honest and direct. Listening with the intent of understanding versus listening to simply respond. Such huge wisdom and things that we're going to be talking about today, using empathy. Leaning into it, planning for it. Being kind, honest, empathic, understanding. Yeah. Listening to what the issue is before pursuing. Remaining calm and factual, actively listening to the person. Remaining calm. So interesting, between what was happening with Carrie and I, that wasn't necessarily what happened internally for you. But you have enough awareness to know that might be happening inside of me. It's all churning, but I need to remain calm throughout it. Thank you. So that's how our interface is with clients and patients. And so the last one is, as a leader or other leaders, if you're an emerging leader, what I've learned about conflict includes. So now take it inward into your organization. So that's how you do with patients and clients. What have you observed, healthy and unhealthy, about conflict? What does it include? Amazing. Being respectful. Opportunity to grow, yes. Yes, don't delay the conversation. Yes, conflict doesn't have to be negative. There's a lot of good stuff that comes from differing perspectives and opinions. It's how we handle it, isn't it? Being challenged isn't a bad thing. Amazing. Yeah, some people personalize the conflict. No matter how much you talk about it, it still can become personal. Knowing what I want from the relationship can improve relationships, absolutely. Yes, not all leaders are good at resolving conflict. Yeah, so the question today is, how do I become good at resolving conflict? What might that look like? So self-awareness being a piece, understanding of how I can do it, because I do it with clients and patients, and then what happens inside as well. And you know, sometimes the challenge, of course, for us in our teams is that we see each other day in and day out, and we see ourselves in extremely stressful conditions sometimes, and that adds sometimes to conflict. So if we haven't done, you know, the work that we talked about when we talked about what changes for you as a leader, or when we talked about how do you use influence, how your communication is going, that all sets the groundwork for healthy conflict, and it can still go sideways. Should be addressed promptly. Doesn't have to be negative, absolutely. Okay, good, thank you. Become self-aware. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Carrie. So just come back to the webinar if you can. So look for the little flower at the bottom and come back to the webinar. So yeah, so just to summarize that, our experiences with conflict when it comes to how you grew up, how you address it with clients or patients, and then how you address it as a leader, all play into how you can become really great at addressing conflict. So I'll turn it to you, Carrie, and I'm going to go off camera so they can focus on you.
Thanks so much, Maria. This picture I love. I might actually blow it up and frame it for myself someday. And I think it really reflects the quote that we have here, that conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. And this, of course, is a statue, very old statue that sort of fell and crumbled, a tree that grew up in its space, and that tree and the statue are now living in sort of a different kind of harmony, perhaps, than either of them ever expected they would. So we'll move to the next slide, and we're going to talk a bit about Thomas Kilmann and the 5 conflict styles. Some of you may have seen this before. Some of you may have done your own assessment of this before. This is just so crucial when you think about how you react and respond in a conflict situation. And of course, much like we've talked about situational leadership, of these 5 conflict styles, none of them is bad in and of themselves. We're once again in a place where you really need to think situationally. So up the left-hand side, the pink arrow, when you're in the top of the quadrant, is where you're being more assertive. And you're being more assertive because the issue is important to you. On the bottom, the axis that moves you to the right hand of the quadrant, the more you get to the right hand, the more that you're being cooperative, and the more important the relationship is to you. So that's one of the things that you think about, hopefully, as you're picking which style you want to use in a particular space and time. Sometimes it's also about where is the other person and what is the style that's going to meet with them best. So I'm going to start over in the top left. The issue is very important to you. You're being very assertive. And the relationship might not be as important to you. You don't feel like you need to be as cooperative. And that's when you're competing. And really, the end result you're looking at in a compete is someone wins, someone loses. So if you use it poorly, you could be seen as stubborn, you could be seen as aggressive if you use it at the wrong time. If you use it well, you could be seen to stand up for what's important, have courage under fire. It's also a place where you may need to be if you're giving people clear direction, as we talked about before. This isn't a, this isn't a negotiation. I'm telling you what it is that I need you to do. It's something that if you're ever involved in purchasing, quite often it's fairly straightforward and about the compete side. I'm looking for a good product at a good price. What does that look like? So there is a place for compete. I will say, I'll share with you my results the last time that I did this assessment, and I came up 0 on compete. So that's an area that I know I need to do a bit of work on because I don't necessarily step into it very well. And another example of using compete from my history is working with a group of people who they always worked in compete mode. And if you didn't come to them with working a little bit competitively yourself, you weren't able to sort of get into the group and sort of be listened to, and you had to compete a little bit, unfortunately, in this group to earn a bit of respect. So my goal in that group was to try and go there and then see if we could all work together into a different space. So there was no moving them until they sort of accepted me as being able to sort of stand up with them. And then there was an attempt to move to a different space. The bottom left is where you're going to avoid. No one wins, no one loses. So again, the relationship may not be that important that you even want to get into something. The issue may not be that important that you want to get into it. If you use it poorly, you can be seen to be secretive and people might have mistrust. If you're not addressing conflict when it needs to be addressed, you may be seen as not caring about anything if you're always in the avoid mode. On the other hand, avoiding and withdrawing, if you use it well, it can be seen as tactful, sort of a graceful withdrawal from something that you have restraint. Again, the issue may just not be an issue that's sort of worth getting into, and the relationship isn't something that's worth engaging in conflict in order to resolve. It's a conflict with somebody that you're only going to meet once, and it's a minor conflict, and it's not going to impact the outcome. Let it go and focus on the more important things that you need to be doing with that person. We'll move to the right-hand side where you say, listen, this relationship is important to me. I want to cooperate. I want to build a relationship. At the top, collaboration is the most assertive way to work on a relationship, work on an issue, and you want to use that when the issue is of great importance. So again, you're striving for both people winning here. If you use it poorly, and we've talked about this a little bit already, if you're constantly trying to collaborate, even if it's a very small issue with somebody you're never going to sort of interact with again, you can complicate things unnecessarily, slow things down. People can also see constant collaboration as you avoiding decisions that you should be making. And if you use it well, obviously you get creative problem solving, you get all viewpoints, you get buy-in and ownership. So collaboration is a great place to be. I guess I didn't mention my avoid. I think I was low to medium in avoid. Collaboration is something that it came out of my assessment that I rely on all the time. Accommodation, the next one is one that I rely on perhaps again a little bit more than I should. So accommodation is where you say, I'm gonna give up what it is that I'm looking for a win for them. So again, that's the right thing to do if the relationship is really important, but the issue isn't that important. You know, why wouldn't you let them have a win and feel good about themselves? Again, if you use it poorly, you're not seen as firm, you're not seen as principled, if you're always accommodating, and you're not seen as direct. But if you use it well, people see it as that you're being thoughtful of others, thoughtful of issues that are important to them when they're perhaps less important to you. As long as you're following the rules when you accommodate, you still have to hold people accountable to the rules, and you can be seen as somebody who's graceful in defeat. Yes, what you want makes sense. I'm prepared to do that, and I hope that it gets what it is that you're looking for. And then, of course, compromise is the place in the middle. Before we really understood collaboration, a lot of people used the term compromise as a win-win, but it's not. Everybody's winning a little bit and losing a little bit. So again, in most places, hopefully you want to get to collaborate. Compromise is that middle ground. I want to be assertive, but not, I also want to cooperate to some degree. The issue is important enough to address, but not important enough for me to really spend a lot of time trying to engage in the win-win. As long as we can come to that middle ground that we're both okay with, then let's move forward. If you use it poorly, it can be seen as gamesmanship. Like, I'll give you this if you give me that, and that you're trying to, you know, still sort of cook a win for yourself by making them give up important things and you only give up little things. So think about that if you're going to compromise. It can be seen as too much of a rush to a solution when perhaps collaboration is needed. It can also, much like avoid, you can kind of be seen as unprincipled if you overuse compromise. And of course, if you use it well, you're seen as somebody who's flexible, that you will seek the reasonable solution instead of, you know, going to one of those other 4 places that might either take no time, but not really address the issue, or take an awful lot of time. So we wanted to put this chart up next with and allow you to go to your polls tool so that you can tell us a little bit about thinking about those 5 types of conflict. What do you think are the areas that you perhaps most need to work on, most need to practice, most need to get comfortable with? It's, you know, for me, compete, it's that comfort level, certainly, as well as needing to just practice understanding how to do it well. It looks like those of you who have answered, a number of you are in the same boat as I am. So we've got people in all 5 of the quadrants now. Yes, accommodating sometimes can be challenging as far as recognizing, okay, this is one that that I can walk away from and let them have, and it's the right thing to do in this scenario. Avoiding, yeah, that can be, and again, there's this sense that avoiding is always bad, that you always need to engage, and doing some thinking about perhaps there are times that not engaging is in fact the right thing to do. It allows you to focus on a bigger issue or whatever the case may be. But it looks like the vast majority of us here need to think a little bit about how to get comfortable in compete, and appreciate people sharing that. And we'll be thinking about that a little bit in our reflection as well, for those of you that are doing the reflection exercises. So thank you for sharing that. And there's a reference at the bottom of that slide as well that gives you quite a bit more detail on that tool if you wish to spend a little bit more time thinking about it. So we want to get even more now into specific behaviors, because it's all well and good, again, the theoretical, but how exactly do we deal with things, and what is it that we do? So behaviors that can be our greatest challenge to work with. I'm going to go through a few of those. And the three things to really think about is, how do you identify the behavior? Spending a bit of time trying to understand why that behavior is happening, and then we'll give you some ideas how to navigate. This picture here too is also a picture that I took, and what we had here is, this is an elephant rescue organization. Elephants that have the one in the front, you can see he has a prosthetic leg. So elephants that, this is in Thailand, that stepped on landmines. And the one in the front's a bit younger. The one in the back is an older male, or sorry, an older female elephant who was blind, who was rescued from sort of a tourism situation. And these two particular elephants, so there's the obvious metaphor that sometimes conflict in behavior is the elephant in the room that somebody needs to address, but even deeper than that, with these two, they both had behaviors that needed to be changed. So this younger elephant with the prosthetic leg was very aggressive, couldn't be well controlled when things needed to be, he needed to be moved from one to another. He would poke at the other elephants and sort of try and get them annoyed. The one in the back, the blind, I'll call her a matriarch elephant, she wasn't doing very well at all. She wasn't eating, she was despondent. None of the other elephants sort of really connected with her and took her in. And then they put these two elephants together, and it ended up being the perfect solution for both of them. The matriarch had a younger sort of spunky elephant that she could help work with and help work on his behaviors with, and he would guide her around. He guided her to where the food was. If she couldn't sort of smell because the wind was in the wrong direction, he would take her over to the water. So that idea that, conflict, all of the challenges of conflict, also thinking about, is there something this person needs? It's not always the case, but it can be. So we're going to talk first about what I find one of the most challenging behaviors, and that is the passive aggressive behavior. And really, the best way that we came up with to identify this are people who are able to maintain a technical correctness in what they are doing and saying, while subtly undermining the process, the decision, the conversation that you're going through. So examples, well, Marie and I came up with a ton of examples as we were talking about this, but somebody who does say, you just spent the past half an hour talking about the client voice, and you're about to move on to something else, and somebody says, I'm not sure we spent enough time talking about, have we really brought the client voice into this? And you're thinking, well, we've had this conversation. What is it that you think that we're missing? But they feel like it's heading in a direction they don't like, so they're trying to drag you back into a conversation. People who, you've trained to do something new and they're just not doing it. And they say, well, I don't understand it. Knowing that saying I don't understand it, you have a responsibility to say, well, what don't you understand? How can I help you learn how to do it? But it's just sort of this constant, as clear as you are, as direct as you are, you sort of constantly get this, well, I don't understand. Can you tell me about this again? Can you tell me about that again? So it's really challenging to identify in the first place. And sometimes it's actually quite easy to identify. Most of the time it's fairly insidious and subtle. To understand it, the thinking about the two components of it, essentially, if you're getting aggressive from somebody, it's because they feel they've been wronged somehow. There's something about it that is challenging them, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And passive, because they either don't know how to be assertive, or because being assertive hasn't worked for them in the past. We sort of talked about that, what you experienced in your family, maybe they haven't sort of been able to move beyond that, and they just can't figure out any other way to express themselves. And some tips related to that is, make sure that you are direct about it, that you're not ignoring the behavior, stay calm. And what you're talking about is what's wrong with the behavior again. Address it one-on-one as much as possible. And when you're addressing it one-on-one, if you can create some space for them to express their feelings in an open way, you may be able to move them to a little bit of a different place where they feel like, okay, I will be heard if I have this conversation in a one-on-one place, and then move on. You may or may not get particularly far with keeping that behavior from happening again by supporting them in this way. Sometimes you do need to move into that more directive, disciplined kind of way. I'm just going to, before we move to the next slide, point out there's 2 references attached to this one. One of them has a lot more behaviors and suggestions on how to support them and deal with them than we have enough time to talk about today. And another one speaks a fair bit more about that passive aggressive and tips on how to deal with passive aggressive. So if we can move to the next behavior, so we sort of picked 3 and thought that these 3 made sense for us to talk about. You often get folks whose behavior seems like they feel like they're always the victim. So you're constantly hearing complaints from this individual about their problems, perceived or real. And when something goes wrong, it's not only not their fault, but they actually feel like they are the victim of whatever went wrong. Somebody purposefully did something to make this process not work, and it certainly wasn't them. The interesting thing to think about related to understanding this behavior is often people who exhibit this behavior are very conscientious workers, and they very much try to control all aspects. So really, they do have, rightly or wrongly, they have a feeling of helplessness, and they truly believe that they have been victimized, whether it is the case or not. So that's the other thing to constantly think about, is these people often aren't, when they're exhibiting this behavior, they're not doing it sort of because they've seen that this is a way to behave because they read it somewhere. They truly feel this way, that they have been victimized. So there's a patience in those conversations. There's a bit of empathy that needs to come forward always, but again, not supporting that tendency towards helplessness. So it's balancing empathy without sort of giving into that, oh, poor you, you're right. So if you can point out evidence that's contrary to the victim narrative, maintain your boundaries. When you talk to them, follow up with a written summary and action steps, and also, as much as possible, provide productive ways for them to address their own concerns. And of course, if they do that and they do a good job, we've talked about feedback, giving that positive praise that they've dealt with an issue on their own and that it came out positively. And the third one that we will quickly speak about is the blaming behavior. So again, you can see how some of these behaviors also intertwine with each other a little bit, but somebody who doesn't ever take responsibility for their own actions, it's always someone or something else that caused the problem. And trying to take that moment to understand, this comes from fear. This comes from a place of, what are the consequences going to be? Are people going to look down on me if I'm the one who did this wrong? Am I going to look down on myself? How's my self-esteem going to feel if I take this hit for doing something wrong? So your tips for somebody who's blaming someone else, again, is redirect them from their version of events and look at the verifiable facts of the situation. In your organization, doing your best to create a culture of learning from mistakes and growing from mistakes, trying to reduce that fear a little bit for people. However, holding them accountable for things that are clearly theirs to own. First of all, they'll learn what it means to be held accountable, and maybe it's not as bad as they think it is. And second of all, they will recognize that this behavior of blaming other things won't be tolerated, and that you can see through that behavior by looking at the facts. So really digging a bit deeper into understanding the why behind behaviors, and this is created by David Rock and came out of the neurosciences, and using our picture here, and I know Maria's talked about this in other sections of that You constantly need to sort of keep asking why, so there's sort of that duplication there until you really get down to the meat of the issue. And in the SCARF model, you're asking, why are people behaving this way? And SCARF model says that there are five different things that could cause people to behave. So status is one of them, and it's not necessarily that people want to have more status than anyone else. They just don't want to have less status than their peers, than other people with the same job title, than other people who are doing the same work. So if that feels threatened, you may see bad behavior coming out. Certainty, and of course, we've all been living, and in healthcare in general, and in social, the social support areas in general, there is constantly a great deal of uncertainty, and even more so in the last year than ever. But uncertainty, as you know, causes sort of, again, those internal reactions, and people may behave differently based on those internal feelings that they have. Autonomy, if they feel like you're taking their autonomy away. Relatedness, we all know that people sort of need those connections in their life. And fairness, I think, is pretty straightforward. So we'll move to the next slide that just digs into each of these a little bit more. And there's a link here as well that you can read a bit more about SCARF and some of these tools, but really what you're trying to do, you're recognizing that sometimes the way people behave, the way people engage in conflict is about a threat, and that they're trying to minimize their threat. So the goal is to understand what that threat might be, and then is there anything that you can do to address it, to help minimize it and maximize the reward. So why people may be threatened related to status. They may have misunderstood feedback that they received, or if the feedback wasn't well given to them by somebody, it may have come across in a way that threatened their status and their self-esteem and feeling about themselves. Somebody new joins a team that is really highly skilled and really praised, may make somebody feel like their status in the team has dropped, or they're not getting credit for their contributions. So we've got some proactive approaches that you can take. Again, as we talked about, practicing that feedback. Check in if it looks like somebody took the feedback differently than it was intended. Of course, as we talked about, providing praise and giving people opportunities to develop their skills and knowledge so that they feel valued and they feel like their status is in line with status of the other people in the organization that are of similar positions. Certainty, again, it could be one particular issue that is a lot of unknown, or it could be an accumulation of many issues that have a bit of uncertainty, and there's only so much you can do with uncertainty. But if you can break down complex issues into chunks, if you can be as clear as possible, but again, be very, very honest as to what you are certain about and what you are not. Autonomy, I've seen organizations that were quite small organizations, and then as they grew, new policies and procedures came in, and for staff it felt threatening to their autonomy. Or a new leader comes in and they don't know if their autonomy is going to be in question. The new leader's asking them about things, it makes them nervous. So knowing that you still have to follow policies, you still have to follow procedures, explain them as much as you can, and give people the room to try their initiative, you know, within the boundary that they can. Delegating also supports. It makes people know that they're trusted. Relatedness, wondering about in our current sort of all of our virtual work might be something that takes relatedness. As many of you have reflected on, as you move into leadership positions, your relationships and your relatedness is going to change. So that's something that can be challenging for folks. So there's options, but making sure that you're checking in regularly with people. If you've got regular meetings scheduled, if you've got regular one-on-ones, and even setting people up with buddies, somebody who you know hasn't really connected with everyone in the team yet because they're new. Connect them with somebody that will help bring them in and feel that relatedness within the team. And then, of course, fairness, again, real or perceived unfairness. So it may be that a coworker has accommodations that allows them to do some different hours or do something differently than the way that everybody else does. You can't talk about those accommodations, but if people are looking at them and saying, how come they get a better, whatever they think better is, a better deal than I do as far as. or if somebody appears to be promoted without merit or seniority, or somebody doesn't get a promotion that somebody else gets. You can think of all those ways that people might, again, real or perceived, believe are unfair. And really what you can do with fairness is be as honest as you can about what is occurring and why. Be very honest about, what you can't share. Hopefully you've built some of that trust that you can rely on and sort of lean on that trust and relational leadership to say, there are things I can't talk to you about. I believe you're being treated fairly. I've looked at it. I can look at it again, but can you please, sort of rely on our relationship and our trust. Encouraging mutual acceptances of differences, again, to each to their need. And there's also, if it's a real challenge within a team, spending some time together to set a team charter and talking about everybody understanding each other's roles and expectations, so that the team knows that you have set expectations for everybody, that you have set their role, and that you are holding everybody equally accountable to those things. There are other tips in the SCARF, and I'm sure each of you have tips of things that you've done as you've run into these kinds of things that you see people behaving out of that threat. And hopefully, particularly those who have multiple people in your organization doing the sessions, you'll have some time to share some of those things with each other as well outside of session. So at this point, I'm going to hand it back to Maria. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carrie. So that's helpful information as we think about conflict. And it is one of those areas I think that many of us know we have to find ways of addressing really well. And as leaders particularly, it is something that it's part of our responsibility of modeling for people what it looks like to address conflict well, and know that people are looking to you to see how it is that it gets done. So the last part of our hour together, we thought, okay, how do we tie all of these pieces together? There are so many different approaches to this. So we're going to articulate one, we're going to give you a reference for another. But we thought we would leave you with, some really concrete, practical ways of doing it. So this Viktor Frankl quote, I think, is really important as we think about conflict. So between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And so depending on how we react or respond or address conflict, something will happen within us. Like, it's inevitable. When it gets personal, something happens. It's just the way that our brain is made up from hunting and trying to understand. We have a response. So understanding that response, even from, again, how did I respond this morning? How do I respond in these situations? Helps us to then create a space between a conflict is coming up in front of me, whether it's one that you're dealing with every week at your team meetings, or someone that's there daily with you, or perhaps it's something new, and you will have a response. And so the practice of creating a space between that stimulus, that conflict that's happening, and how you're going to respond is the practices of creating that space so that you can respond in your best self. And you respond not just out of reaction, but out of a proactive stance of, I'm going to try to remember all these things that are important about conflict. And in my team, I'm going to be really thinking about relationship and how through this conflict, I'm going to aim to leave the relationship as it was or better through this conflict. Because that is a long-standing part of being a team leader, and in leadership is to really think through that ongoing relationship. So really I practice this at home, I don't do it very well, to try to think, okay, someone's really bugging me and they know the buttons to push in me. How do I try to step back and breathe before I move forward? And so some kind of practical ways to do that. So acknowledging, of course, emotions to de-escalate conflict is really important, because as you are having a response, that individual is also, or those people are also having a response to the conflict. And so there's all kinds of emotions in the air that we have to try to de-escalate in order to get to the conflict. So such not so helpful responses, and these would be the ones that my children would say I do all the time. Why didn't you listen? And so sometimes in our stress, that might, it may not be, hopefully it isn't, but in our team setting, it erodes. So why didn't you listen may not be great. If you really felt that that way, you would have. Also, that kind of blaming, it's your issue. You're always disrupting meetings. They're just a blame statement. You ought to apologize to her, telling people what to do. Everyone thinks so, moving it away from the I to I've now collected a whole group of people who think this about you. And if I were you, this is what I would do, giving advice. So imagine those responses that you tend to go to that maybe aren't as productive as they need to be. Some more helpful ones might be, and this one I know that many of us know, is I'm curious. So I'm curious about this. Tell me a bit more. Let's see how I've stepped back and I'm creating space. And even in that question, I'm creating space so that how I'm supposed to respond catches up with me as opposed to it being just a reaction. Being able to just hear, that must have been hard for you. Or a statement that helps people understand, I'm hearing you, I understand. Also, we don't want to compromise and think that we have to agree with everything in conflict. So sometimes things like, I see things differently. Let's consider, okay? Everyone says this, about you, or, well, I see things differently. It's not fair. I see things differently. Have you considered? So you think that, a paraphrasing. So a way to, go from, okay, this is, the conflict, the issue that you're bringing up is this, and then to be able to say, okay, so you think that. So I'm just creating space between stimulus and response to acknowledge and de-escalate the emotions so that we can get to the conflict. Your main concern is, trying to summarize again, get it down to what there's, help me to understand, that's one of my favorites, help me to understand. And one that I go to a lot when it gets really, really heavy, let's pause. Let's pause. Walking away for 2 to 3 minutes, and literally walking away, is sometimes the thing that you need to do so that everyone can kind of recalibrate and come back in a different stance. So what I might recommend is that as you enter situations where there is conflict, whether it's perpetual, as in you see it all the time, new, something that you see is starting to escalate, really think about, what I do is I think about, okay, I see the conflict inside of me. Already, I'm beginning to slow my breathing down as I think about that conflict. I try to think about, okay, I'm just going to center, just going to pause. And I have 2 or 3 go-to sentences that I use. I just have them in the back of my mind so that I know when a conflict happens at work, not so good at home, I'm going to try to come to this place of, okay, help me to understand. So this is what I'm hearing you say. It sounds like this is really hard for you because, so you've slowed the conversation. So I encourage you to think about how can I, in that moment, breathe, and then think about 2 to 3 sentences that you just always have so that you can buy yourself and that person time to slow down a bit to then be able to get to the issues at hand. So really important, de-escalating emotion as a critical tip. And then what we'd like to share with you is just a little bit of a step-by-step process that you might use, that we call it the way of healthy conflict. We use it with a lot of our the clients that we have as a way of them working through conflict. And so, so here's the steps. And so I'll give you an example. So when I was a team lead, I was in a conflict with someone that was on my team, and it was regular. And this person was really passive. So she would often just be in the middle of meetings and then just have huge sighs. There we go, not thighs, sighs. And so she would constantly like this, right? Or passive aggressive, as in she would quietly storm away. Or it would just be silence. So we'd be having a great conversation about certain things, and how she would own the space is silence. And it became a pattern that I knew I needed to address. And this is hard to address. So it was a one-on-one that I invited her into. And I actually gave her these steps to say, I'd like us to have this conversation using this frame. And she found it really helpful. And so it starts with cooling off. So a time, it may not be that you want to address it right away. You might say, you know what, I've got too much emotion to this right now, but I really want to talk to you about it. Can we set up a time? We're too busy right now. So this is at the end of the meeting, we're exhausted. So anything to cool off and to recenter is important. So take the time to do that. Second, important for us to treat the other person with respect. And that comes in your attitude, conveyed by your specific behavior, which could be how we sit, how we listen, how we use eye contact. And of course, that's different depending on our culture. So be mindful of that. In your presence. So are you on your phone? Are you checking your emails? Or are you just totally present to the conversation? Tell them what's bothering you using eye language. So I find it difficult when you are completely silent at meetings and I'm not sure how to read that. I find it difficult when you're sawing through meetings and I don't know what that means. I would find it helpful if you just shared where you were coming from. I find it difficult when you leave the meeting, when we're checking out and you don't say anything and it's meeting after meeting. I want to share what's bothering me, how I'm seeing the issue. I want to also spend time saying, tell me what it's like for you at the meeting, because I want to learn. I want to know, maybe I'm coming across way too aggressive. Maybe the pace is moving really fast. Maybe they're missing information. Maybe back to the information that Carrie shared, maybe they're not feeling equal. Their status is being threatened. Maybe they're not feeling certain about their work. Maybe they don't think things are fair. So I want to listen to understand and experience what they're saying. That means meaning, feeling, and content. And so I'm going to tell them what I feel, and then I want to listen to where they're coming from so that we can get it all on the table, all the different perspectives. So in that situation, it was a sense of, I just feel like work just comes at me and I don't know when it's coming and it feels really unfair. I don't feel like everybody on the team does all the work that I do. I feel like my work is really minimized by the team. Helpful for me to know. So now we can talk about solutions. So it's important that we state our views, our needs, and our feelings. So, okay, that's really important. I hear what you're saying. This is what I need. I need us to come to a different place so that you don't feel that it's not fair or you're not feeling heard. And I feel like you're contributing. I need you to stay until the end of the meeting. I need to know what you're feeling. So let's work through that. So I've shared, they've shared, and we've come to a place of having views and needs and feelings understood. I also want to take responsibility for things. So if that person is saying something that I've contributed to, I need to be able to say, wow, that's helpful for me to understand. I'm sorry, I thought you were okay if we actually action planned at the meeting and you were given tasks. I'm hearing you say that that doesn't feel helpful for you. Let's talk about ways in which we can address that. And so we want to move problem solving. So at the end of, and in that meeting, we might say, okay, well, let's talk about what's important to you and what's important to me. And now let's look at solutions that might help. So out of that meeting, I understood that it was helpful for me to give her a heads up of here's what's going to happen and here's the work that I think needs to happen. It was really important that we negotiate a timeline of how that could happen with her instead of just setting the timeline at that moment. It was also really important for her to feel appreciated. I needed from her that she was going to really listen to how she came across at meetings, that she was going to participate, and if she felt like she couldn't, that she would tell us so that we could do whatever was needed in order for her to participate. So these are all ways in which we're able to come to solutions that are helpful in a team setting. Those types of misunderstandings of what one person needs and what one other person is perceiving can erode a team. And while the example might seem small, it actually played a big role in how our team felt and the health of our team. And then at the end, I want to affirm, forgive, or thank. So I want to say thanks very much for being with me and being open to sharing where you're at. Here's the actions and what we're going to do. I want to affirm that this conversation happened and that we have a plan of moving forward. I need to tell you that, of course, it wasn't perfect, that we all fall back into our patterns, but we could come back to our agreements and we could try to move forward. It certainly made it better. So what we wanted to present to you here today is these kind of 8 steps, simple steps that we can take, not simple to go through, but to have, And with organizations we work with, we actually have this as a pamphlet, and we encourage people to, if they're in a situation where they need to take a conflict to another level, that they remember these steps and that they actually all go through them together, so that you know where the process is, the expectations. We've also included a link here to Crucial Conversations, which many of you might be familiar with. It's another approach, very important and wise as well. So these are things that we think might be helpful for you as you think about conflict. Okay. So much to share in an hour, and so much more. This is obviously just the tip of the iceberg, but we again wanted to leave you with some practical tools as you think about your leadership, emerging or new or seasoned. So we want to move to talking a little bit about the reflection questions. We also, and I failed to mention it because we were in the middle of our role play there, but one of the questions, we're going to do 2 questions to leave. We have 4 minutes, so we'll do it quickly. But one question is, our next topic is HR, and HR is so broad that what we wanted to do was just get a sense of what are some of the topics that are really important to you for us to think about covering. So I'll put that in a moment, and then we'll do a quick checkout as we normally do. So the reflection questions for certificate participants, those of you who are doing the certificate, you'll know your eligibility. The due date is October 26, 2020, maximum 3 pages, just like in the past. 3 questions. How has your experience in the past with conflict impacted how you react when conflict appears? Really think back to the questions we went through today. Which of the Thomas Kilmann's conflict styles is your most challenging? You've started that work today. And what can you do to enhance or practice your skill and comfort with this style? So what's your stretch? And then imagine an interaction with someone that is displaying a behavior you find especially challenging. And you know, each one of us has one of the styles, one of the behaviors that just rubs us the wrong way. Being aware of that helps us to know, okay, you know what? I might need to do more work here because I know I react to it. So what can I do? And how will you navigate using the tools and theories that we've discussed? And you might want to pull one. If it isn't one that you imagine, you might want to go back and say, you know, I remember this and I maybe didn't handle it as well as I could. I would have done it this way. So one way or the other for you to do that one as well. Okay, so if you can go back to your handout for a moment. And the question is, what are some key things you hope we cover in the HR Essentials for Leaders on October 26th? And then we'll do a quick checkout. So go here. Again, it's just one of those ones that we can top up. We'll just spend a moment here. HR things. So as a leader, here's the HR things that I would find very helpful to know more about. Might be about supervision, health and safety, policy, progressive discipline. Nice and practical. Accommodations, very good. When to consult with HR. Yep, performance management. Progressive discipline. Accommodations. Progressive discipline. Performance improvement, supervision. Okay. Where the law currently stands on the probationary period, I've heard that this is outdated. Good, thank you. Very helpful. Absence patterns. Performance improvement coming up as well. Excellent. Okay, lots of stuff on accommodations. Yeah, assessing someone's progress in their role, performance management stuff. Okay, excellent. So last question. As you leave, one word to describe how you're leaving, hopefully relieved that the conflict was done, the session. Good word. Educated, reflective, confident, powered, informed, refreshed, I'm glad, tuned, practical, hopeful, confident, better. Curious, challenged, prepared. Well, thank you again for being with us. We'll see you next month at our next session. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye.